Okay, let's begin part 4 of your recordings. Here we're going to review the journal, the final assignments, which are the journal, the midterm evaluation and signature page, and the final evaluation and signature page. Let's talk about the journal purpose a little bit. Why do we ask students to complete these journals? We want to help the student develop the ability to critically evaluate self. How are they doing in practicum? What would they do differently if they had this situation to do over again? What particularly impacted them about this situation, this key experience that they're writing about? We want them to be able to use that critical thinking in evaluating their own practice and their own behaviors. It also helps the students to relate theory to practice. It forces them to do what we've asked you to do in supervision, which is to take a situation, discuss it, and then also talk about what skills did they learn in class that they used in this key experience. So there's 5 key experiences because there's 5 journals and there's one each journal. And the student will go into great depth, including looking at themselves and looking at their classwork and how that related to this key experience. It's also a tool for the field instructors and task supervisors and the faculty liaisons to watch and see and evaluate the students' experiences and progress. Are they making progress? Are they on target with their projects or interventions? Are they taking on more intense or higher need work as their practicum progresses? We can also monitor the number of hours at practicum, and it helps us to expand on the students' ability to communicate in written form. So please feel free to correct their grammar. There are spell check tools within taskstream. Direct your student to use them. And we talk to the student about that this is a class, just like any other class. And you don't turn in papers, or we hope you don't, without proofreading them and making sure that your sentence structure, your grammar, your spelling, your plagiarism or non-plagiarism are all being checked and taken care of. And so we expect the same in this journal process. We ask that journals be completed during agency practicum time. This is a method of reflection for the student and a method of processing what they are experiencing. And all of that is part of the practicum experience and is thus counted in their practicum time. And I want them to be able to learn how to manage multiple different demands. Not only their client work, but the projects that you've given them, the documentation that they have to do, and their coursework. And so learning how to do that within the allotted 24 hours is an important thing for them to do, enables them to prioritize. And so we really like them to complete their journals during agency practicum time. As I said, there's 5 journals due during the semester. The faculty liaison set the due dates. Those were given in the first section, but you'll want to check that with your student to be sure that those dates are in your calendar. And that way, if you're on vacation or you have something happening like surgery, or you have a project or an accreditation that's coming up, that you make sure that those journals are turned in at a time that works with your flow and your schedule. When the students submit the journal on taskstream, the student is going to ask again, is going to request comments from you, and you'll be alerted via email that you have a request waiting. And we'll go into that a little bit more in the next slides. We ask that the students be sure that they are submitting the journals to you in adequate time for you to provide comments, and then for the student to then submit it to the faculty liaison in time to meet the due date. And so it's important for you to set expectations with the student about, I need your journal to be submitted a minimum of 5 days before your due date so that I have time to review. And so, or some field instructors want 2 days, or it's up to you how much time you need for the student to submit it so that he or she can still turn it in by the due date. So let's talk about the traditional journal format. So this is one that you are used to if you've been a field instructor for us before, although we have reordered some of the components, and I've stretched this out into several different slides. So of course, as typical, we have the key experience and reflection. So for 3 of the journals that are traditional journals, Journal 1, Journal 3, and Journal 5 will be your traditional journals where the student will choose one specific key experience, one thing that they did, one group session, one individual session, one meeting that they went to in the community, the advocacy day that they went to, one specific thing that they did. And then they are going to apply each of these sections to that one key experience. So B would be what influenced that key experience. Individual, family, community, and cultural are all 4 parts of the journal that they are going to have to address and how those influences impacted the situation. Then looking at values and ethics, part A is looking at the code of ethics and what were present in the key experience and how. Did we see self-determination, integrity, competence, service, etc.? And part B then is looking at any ethical dilemma or conflict that was present in the key experience. And talking a little bit about that and how that was resolved or not resolved. And the next section is diversity. What issues of diversity were present? There's always some kind of issue of diversity that you need to be aware of. And then social and economic, and it should say environmental justice as well. Identifying those issues that were within the key experience and how you did respond or might respond to those specific issues. Remembering that the student is asked to provide the journal to you, the field instructor, with plenty of lead time. If we see that if a student emails us and says, my journal was only late because the field instructor was late getting it in, we're going to look back and we can tell when the student submitted it and when the field instructor commented. And so if the student submitted it a week in advance and the field instructor was a little late getting the comments, then we're really not going to penalize the student. But if the student turned it in 8 hours before it was due, that doesn't give the field instructor enough time, and so then the student will be penalized and lose some points. So we ask them to really get that to you with plenty of lead time. Another issue that I want to talk about is that students really want and need feedback from the field instructors on their journals. Saying this was a great journal, good job, is really not enough for the students. And it is their absolute #1 request from their field instructors is that they get more feedback from their field instructor on their journal. They want to know, are they on target? Did they miss something specific? Did I miss a portion of the project? Did I miss something of the assessment? Did I misinterpret something that was occurring during this interaction? Are there underlying political factors that I wasn't aware of? They really want to know am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? So that they can have some very specific feedback from you about that, and maybe some recommendations for how they could have done things differently, or added a component, or enriched or enhanced the work that they did. They really want that feedback to, one, kind of validate that they're doing the right thing, and then two, give them ideas for growth and how they can improve their services. So as much as you can, please provide in-depth feedback about the journals. Okay, let's continue discussing the traditional journal, which is, again, journals 1, 3, and 5. So you have the key experience, you have influencing factors, you have ethics, values, you have diversity, social and economic justice, and then the next section is the integration of classroom learning and experience. This is highlighted here because it's a huge part of the journal. There's many points associated with this section, and it's very important. The whole purpose of FieId is to connect classroom work with practice, for them to be able to interpret what they've learned in their books and in their classroom and be able to actually apply that learning. And so these connections don't happen automatically. They have to be done very purposefully and very thoughtfully, and students won't do it unless they're pushed to do it. So we have them do it in 3 journals now. But we also expect that you're doing that in supervision and pushing them to make those connections. So in integration of the classroom learning experience, they have a section that's HBSE, which is, again, human behavior in the social environment. They have a research section, a policy section, and a practice section. And there's classes that fit under each of these sections. Policy and research tend to be the least easy for the students to connect, and they'll skip them unless we ask them to please do them at least twice. So there's a specific requirement there. So the student is asked to, under each of these 4 sections, HBSE, research, policy, and practice, that they take some kind of learning. They put the class name, the specific topic or theory that they learned, the skills or the knowledge that they learned. So the class, and then name what they've learned. And then demonstrate their understanding of what they have learned. So if they say Erickson's developmental theory, then they need to give 3 sentences or so to describe what that theory is, so that we can understand that they get it and that they know what that theory is about. And then the third part of that is, how was that theory applied or used in the key experience? So again, they're identifying the class, what their learning was, demonstrating their understanding of that learning, and then how was that learning applied. Okay, so that's the integration of classroom learning and experience section. Then it's the personal reaction, identification of their feelings and emotions, self-reflection and insight. As social workers, or anyone who works in the social services field, we know that you have to have some accurate self-reflection. You have to understand why you're behaving this way. You have to understand how to change your approach based on what your intuitions or what your assessment is saying. You have to be able to cope with the things that you're hearing. So constantly rearranging your boundaries, checking your understanding, etc. But you can't do that if you don't have some insight and some ability to reflect. So we really need to make sure that that is developing for the student. And that's what we find in this section, the personal reaction section. And finally, the last part of the traditional journal, again, 1, 3, and 5 are the traditional journal templates. The students will have a timetable. This is where they keep an accurate recording of when they're at the agency and when they're working. You signing off on the journal through the review tab that's available to you in taskstream, you are saying that yes, these are the hours worked. So you are confirming that. You are saying that yes, this indeed is correct. And so lunches are not counted as work time because they're eating lunch, hopefully. There are certain extenuating circumstances. Maybe you might have a specific busy day where you're with a group of people and lunch is part of the meeting. And so, of course, that's counted. But on the norm, we want to see that students are taking a break in the middle of the day on a regular basis for their perspective and for their self-care. Students push back against this often because they want to crank in the hours, but there's plenty of time to finish practicum. No reason to crank in the hours. They need to learn to set boundaries and to practice as we have taught them with their boundaries and with their self-care. And so they need to take breaks during their day in one way or another, at least 30 minutes. And so those 30 minutes should be pulled out of their recorded working hours. Then there is an activities table on this traditional journal. The activities, they must include at least 6 activities. It's like about a 3-week reporting period. So I'm sure that students have at least done 6 activities in a 3-week period. In the left-hand column of this section, as you can see in the examples that were sent to you, the activities are listed. Then in the right-hand column, every learning goal and practice behavior that was met by this activity should be listed. So you can say learning goal 1, A and B, learning goal 6C, learning goal 9A were met by this practice behavior. And then you're going to identify specifically how this practice behavior was met. So if you're looking at, and let me revisit these a little bit, if you're looking at an activity, for example, that you set up and ran a mindfulness group, okay? So let's say that that was the student's activity, was a mindfulness group. So that's for sure going to meet competency 8, right? Because that's an intervention with groups. So you're going to say which one of these was met through that. So you're going to say intervene. So competency 8 was met and practice behavior B was met, which is applying those foundational practice behaviors, those foundational theories like human behavior, person and environment, etc. And so the student will say on the left-hand side, facilitated mindfulness group. On the right-hand side, at a minimum, it will say competency 8B was met. This competency and practice behavior were met because I reviewed the chart of each client that was in the group and looked at the full assessment. When the group was occurring, I took into account the trauma that each of the clients had gone through in my approach with the client. I was not aggressive. I gave choices for everything that occurred and did not give abrupt deadlines that the client might have felt was threatening. So in that way, I applied knowledge of person and environment and considered their trauma backgrounds. So you can see that they're looking at the activity that's listed, Then you list all of the competencies and practice behaviors that applied. And for example, with the mindfulness group, that's also going to meet learning goal 1 because that's professionalism and ethics. And you meet those quite a bit. So they need to go through all 9 of those and see which ones apply. And then we said how we met competency 8 and the foundational theories. And so the activity, the learning goals and practice behaviors, and then a description and examples of how the practice behaviors were met. Writing is important, grammar, spelling, sentence structure, etc. I talked about that a little bit in the overview. And then the journals need to be received by the due date, and students know the deduction system for the late journals. And really, late journals, if they continue to be late, can really disrupt somebody in practicum and cause them to not pass. And so it's very, very important that they're attentive. Sometimes students will acknowledge that there's an academic side to practicum and then also the actual work side to practicum, and they'll attend to one or the other, but have a difficult time attending to both. And so it's very important that they remember that this is a class and there is a huge academic portion to this that they need to attend to. So now let's talk about the template for journals 2 and 4, which we call our brief journal. So students really gave us feedback that our journals were really long, and we did require some pretty intense critical thinking. So we figured in this new brief journal. So it's much quicker for you to look at, and quite frankly, much quicker for the liaison to grade, and much easier for the student to do. And it kind of gets at some different information to give us a different view of the learning that's occurring in practicum. So there are 2 sections, basically, experience connected to assignment. So the first one is a key experience in field that relates specifically to a course assignment completed in class. Students also may use one in this journal that they're also including in their portfolio from the seminar class, so they can kind of hit 2 birds with 1 stone, or as Dr. Fitch says, catch 2 butterflies with 1 net. So that there's that connection again to coursework. And a key experience. So you're looking at a key experience that specifically relates to a course assignment. Students are going to discuss the course assignment in this section. And then relationship and learning. This is relating the course content to the key experience. What is the key experience that occurred? How did they utilize the skills or knowledge from that course assignment in that key experience? And how was the key experience different as a result of what they learned from that course assignment? So that's the bulk of this brief journal assignment that's really just 2 little sections. Of course, there's the same writing, the same timetable that exists. And then there's the activities table again, but it's brief. It's shorter than the traditional journal because students are going to list their activities, list the learning goals, but they do not explain the how each of those learning goals was met. They simply list them. And so they have to do more of them. They list 10, but it's just listing instead of going into examples and explanations. And then there's a summary question, which I really like, which we have added, which are to summarize skills and competencies and knowledge that have been reviewed in your supervision meetings. So what's occurring? This gives us a picture of what is occurring during your supervision meetings with your students. That is a huge requirement, that 1 hour a week, and it's by our accrediting body. So that's not something that can be skimped on, and we really want to hear more about what's occurring in those supervision meetings. And again, journals are due by the due date. These journals are worth less points, 27 points for Journal 2 and Journal 4. As I said before, students should proofread always for spelling and grammar and use professional language. This is an assignment like any other. So slang, those types of things should not be included. It should be professional language. There's a spell check on taskstream that students should be using. They can also save it as they go along and check spelling in each section. Again, we talked about the lead time. To be able to give you plenty of time, you need to decide how much time you need. Do you need 3 days? Do you need a full week? Do you need longer than that for the student to turn those into you so that you have time to review and still get it in by the student's due date? Again, please provide as much feedback as you can as it's very important to the student. Okay, so what does this look like in taskstream? I encourage you to have your taskstream guide out so that you can follow along with this. If you have your password and your student has logged in, you will be able to see everything in taskstream, and you can begin to look at how this works in taskstream. So the student is going to complete the journal in taskstream, and you're going to review the journal, and so you will be in the reviewer tab. Again, there are 2 tabs that you will see on the opening page of taskstream. One is the reviewer and one is the evaluator. You can see that picture also in your taskstream guide. There's reminders about the 2 tabs in your taskstream tip sheet because this is the #1 error that we see with field instructors. So journals are in the reviewer tab. So that's where you're going to go. Again, the student is responsible for letting you know the due dates. The student completes the journal and then sends you a request for comments. They're specifically going to identify you as the person that they would like to have comments from. And then you are going to type your comments into a big narrative area. You can cut and paste from that journal and put them in there if you need to. All of these also have options for you to export to Word. So if you want to export their journal to Word and then copy and paste from that in your comments, you can do so. And then once comments are received, the student will then submit the journal to the faculty liaison for grading. And then once they submit that, then we as the faculty liaison will get a notice and we'll go in and evaluate that document. But you are just reviewing the document. Tips for making comments in taskstream. Again, one of them is exporting the journal to Word so that you can copy and paste in areas if needed. More feedback is needed than just this looks great or you did a good job or this is very thoughtful. Being very specific for the students. Also, field instructors have said that this times out, and so you should save it frequently and try to do it when you have time to sit down and make those comments. Some folks actually make their comments in Word and then put it into taskstream. I comment right into taskstream, but some folks don't. Some folks will do it in Word and then copy and paste into taskstream, but that's up to you. Okay, so we're moving on from learning plans and journals to the midterm and final evaluations. The midterm and final evaluations are Likert scale evaluations, so they're pretty quick. They're based on the learning plan competencies and practice behaviors, and so you should be discussing these all through the semester and be able to pretty quickly click your Likert scale bubbles. Your faculty liaison is going to make a site visit for midterm, but not for the final. So it's 2 visits, the beginning and the middle. The midterm needs to be completed first by the student and then by the field instructor before that midterm meeting, because we're going to review the midterm documents during the site visit. Hopefully you will have some computer access of some kind so we can look at all of that stuff, but we also sometimes bring our own computers for that, assuming that there's access with your facility. You can see here when final evaluations are due. Since we don't come for that visit, we expect final evaluations to be completely finished by this date. We cannot give a grade until those are finished. It's like a final exam. Without a final exam, you can't give their grade, or their grade will be greatly, greatly lowered. And so it's very important that you complete this evaluation by this date. When completing the evaluations, remember, it's not about your relationship with the student, whether you got along, whether you didn't get along, whether you found the student to be this way with her friends, whatever. It's about performance. We like to ask field instructors at midterm to leave some room for growth. I don't think I've ever seen a undergraduate student at a level 5 at midterm. I'm not at a level 5 when I'm practicing, and so I doubt that undergraduate students would be at a level 5. They need some room for growth and understanding. And like I said before, evaluations shouldn't be a surprise. This is something that should be on the agenda for supervision from the beginning. Every single week, you should be discussing performance. Every single week, you should be looking at the learning plan and talking to them about their progress towards those and their performance in each of those. And so when you get to midterm and when you get to final, there should be no surprises because they already know everything that's happening. That just makes for a much better experience to evaluate this throughout the practicum instead of abruptly at midterm and final. Okay, so in that vein that evaluation should be ongoing, any kind of deficient performance is typically a pattern. So it's something that you're seeing at multiple places throughout the semester, and typically not just suddenly a quick onset of some problem. And so if there is deficient performance in any area, the student should be made aware of that as it's occurring, not at midterm or at final, but when it's occurring. I strongly recommend here that you document this via email to the faculty liaison. If you're seeing a pattern of deficient performance or some issues that are concerning even in the first few weeks, you need to email the faculty liaison. I've had folks get to the midterm meeting and we find out even at midterm or after that there was an action plan that needed to be written in the first 3 weeks. But we didn't know about that until after midterm. We really need to know and be involved. We're here to support you and help you. You don't have to do all of that alone or go through that alone. We want to be able to help you through the process. So share with us what's going on so that we can keep a record and you can keep a record that this has been shared with the student and performance has been evaluated. If this deficiency occurs and persist until midterm. This needs to be documented on the midterm comments. You as a field instructor will have a place to comment, and the faculty liaison will as well, along with the plan for improvement. So an action plan if there are continued issues. If the student earns a U at midterm, the comments should include specific bullet points that outline the requirements the student must meet to progress to an S or satisfactory grade. So field is graded on a unsatisfactory or satisfactory. And so if the student is continuing with the deficient performance, you must give them a U at midterm. And then in the comments, you have to say why they have a U and how they can proceed to an S. Here's what they will have to do to have an S grade. They will have to complete this project on time. They will have to have documentation on time. They will have to arrive on time to work 99% of the time. Whatever the issue happens to be, there can be no more ethical violations, etc. So being very specific at midterm, if there is a U grade or any kind of deficient performance at all, it needs to be recorded on those documents. Using this philosophy, all parties should be aware of issues that are occurring even prior to the midterm and prior to the final, if you are discussing these things every week in supervision, and you're correcting the student when the issue is occurring. If the student does disagree with the evaluation, they are permitted to attach an addendum and also have a place to comment on the midterm and the final evaluation to share that. The faculty liaison has the final decision about the grade. We ask you to be honest about performance. I know field instructors, and I've seen this semester after semester after semester, field instructors feel an obligation, and they feel like they failed if they don't make this as successful and have the student pass. So because field instructors feel guilty or feel like they need to get the student through a successful practicum, they will tend to inflate the grades and even continue to have a student or pass a student that maybe is not meeting competencies correctly. I encourage you to be as objective as possible. And again, the faculty liaison is here to help you with just that. That's the process of becoming an instructor and not a practitioner. And with social work, that's, I think, a little bit harder because we, again, see the strengths in people and so want everyone to be successful, that we often struggle in that area. But again, we can be support for you and we can be the bad guy if needed to be. Now, having said all of that, there are less than 2-3 students every semester, probably 5 students in any given year that struggle. And so that leaves 80 students that don't struggle, actually 100 students that don't struggle. So hopefully this will not happen to you or with your student, but if it does, you have this information to help guide you, and the manual online has information about action plans, and your faculty liaison is always your first point of contact to help you out with any of those issues. So how you do your midterm and final evaluation in taskstream, again, this is where 80 to 90% of the confusion about taskstream happens because field instructors or task supervisors forget that they're switching into a different tab. So when you first log on, you'll be able to see a tab that's a reviewer tab and a tab that's an evaluator tab. For the learning plan and the journal, you will always be in the reviewer tab. For any kind of midterm or final evaluation, you will be in the evaluator tab. If you're in the wrong tab, you won't be able to see what I'm talking about. And I get emails saying I can't see the student's evaluation. And 100% of the time, that's because the field instructor's on the reviewer tab and they can't see anything from the evaluation because they're in the wrong screen. So make sure when you're moving to midterm and final evaluations that you're always on the evaluator tab. It must go through this specific 4-step process. If you try to complete your evaluation before the student does his or hers, you won't have anything to fill out. You won't know what you're doing and it won't look right. So you must go through the process as it's outlined in your guide. The first is that the student completes the midterm or the final self-evaluation. Both of the evaluations are exactly the same, the one that the student completes for a self-evaluation and the one that you complete about the student. Each is a Likert scale, quick checkoff based on those 10 learning goals and the associated practice behaviors. So you have those in the learning plan. You've discussed all semester how that learning plan is progressing, what they're done with, and how they're performing. And then you're evaluating them based on those same criteria. So first, the student will complete his or her own self-evaluation with the Likert scale bubbles, sort of, that they check off. Once that's done, then that will automatically generate to you saying that you have an evaluation. It will be an orange button, which you can look at your pictures on your guide and see. You'll go into a completely different screen in the evaluator tab that we call a grid screen. So it looks different. And that's how you know also if you're in the reviewer tab versus the evaluator tab. In the reviewer tab, you see a gray template on the left-hand side. In the evaluator tab, you see a grid that goes across the entire screen. So you are going to see an orange evaluate button. You will click that evaluate button, and then up pops your blank Likert scale form. And then on the other side, you have an opportunity to view the student's completed form at the same time. So you are going to complete that midterm and final evaluation, write the comments, and select your grade for the student because now you're evaluating. So you're going to click meets or doesn't meet criteria. So if they've completed their evaluation and you're giving them a satisfactory grade, they're fine and they meet criteria. And then you will submit that form. And then we as the field faculty liaisons can now see that form. The student is going to read your comments. It's going to look at the form that you've completed, and then the student can initiate his or her signature page. You don't have to do anything with the signature page. You're signing off at the bottom of your own evaluation. So again, student completes a self-evaluation, which generates that evaluate button for you. You evaluate, write your comments, select your grades, sign off on the form, and submit that form back to the student. The student reads your comments and then goes in and completes the student's signature page. Then I, as a faculty liaison, look at both the evaluations, look at your comments, look at the student's comments, and then I will complete the signature page between the student and the faculty liaison. Okay, so this process for midterm and final is a little bit different than the learning plan and the journals. So it's important to remember that difference as you move forward and complete these assignments in taskstream. Okay, everyone, thanks so much for hanging in there with me and for going over this and learning about expectations in field and how to become a field instructor and move from practitioner to teacher. We always are happy to entertain any questions, any concerns. We have a field committee that is constantly looking to improve the processes, the assignments, etc., and would love to hear from you. Any comments? Taskstream can be kind of complicated. Some people adapt to it really well, and some people have a harder time with it. Your guide is your friend. Put that right next to your computer and always use it when you're on Taskstream, at least until you really, really learn it well. And, you know, come and stop by our office. I have field instructors head up here for an impromptu tutorial on Taskstream quite a bit. Any of us are willing to do that. We have a computer lab here where we can bring in a few people at a time to be able to help you with that if it's necessary. We also are happy to entertain questions, to come to the agency during unscheduled meeting times, whatever you need if you're having any problem. We are really a team in supervising this student. You're not alone out there having to do this by yourself. We are your first resource, and we're happy to chat with you about anything that you need. So please, you can see Professor Piester's information up here. You can find my information on the website and on all of the manuals and most of the materials. My email is CARY, S as in Sam, at Missouri.edu. That's Carrie S at Missouri.edu. Feel free to give me an email anytime, and I will be happy to assist you. Thanks again for hanging in there and watching this until the end. And I look forward to working with you and partnering with you in multiple ways. Thanks so much.